In this video today, I'm going to compare the Blade Runner franchise to the Sister Act franchise. In each case, you have only two movies. First of all, when you look at the highest Rotten Tomatoes score for each franchise, Blade Runner, the highest score is 89% for the original film, with Sister Act, the highest score is a 73% for the first Sister Act movie. That's obviously still a really good score. It's almost certified fresh, but Blade Runner's going to win this round. Then when you look at the lowest score for each franchise, with Blade Runner 2049 actually is the lowest score, and it still has an 88%, which is still a great score. Whereas if Sister Act lowest score is an 18% for Sister Act 2 Back in Habits. Blade Runner wins again. Then when you look at average score for each franchise, you can tell by now Blade Runner wins because it has an average of 88. Sister Act only has an average of 45. Then when you look at gap between lowest and highest score, wow, this is not even close because of Blade Runner. You only have a gap of 1 between 89 and 88. Whereas of Sister Act, you have a gap of 55 between 73 and 18. So Blade Runner is going to win this debate regardless of my personal opinion. But let's look at it now. This is an interesting one because Blade Runner and Sister Act are obviously very different movies. I would say that I respect Blade Runner more than I enjoy it because visually speaking, the movie's great. The production, set design are really memorable. The cyberpunk look the movie has is really memorable. There's definitely craft on display. I respect that Ridley Scott wanted to be ambitious. He wanted to make a slower paced, more cerebral art house sci-fi movie, kind of similar to what Stanley Kubrick did for 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's interesting ideas in Blade Runner. I like the final speech that you hear in the movie. But to be honest, I've also always felt that in this case, the story and characters are not really as interesting. They're not really as compelling or engaging. They feel a bit distant from us, a bit like they're at arm's length, and thus I'm not really connecting with the movie as much as I think I should be. And also, while I think Harrison Ford does a good job of his performance, it's not like I have specific issues with the way Harrison Ford plays the character. When you have an actor who's famous for being Han Solo and Indiana Jones as a cop who's hunting down replicants, when you watch the movie, it's like, oh, this is disappointing because the premise here makes it seem like Decker's gonna be this awesome guy who's going to win fights, is gonna take down replicants. But then you actually watch the movie and you're like, oh, Harrison Ford's character doesn't win any of the fights he's in. He basically loses all of them. At the end of the movie, he only lives because the replicant chooses to let him live. And thus, you're like, oh, that this isn't as awesome as I thought it was going to be. And combine the things I just talked about with the fact that the movie's slower paced, and thus it just feels a bit distant from the audience. Blade Runner 2049 I thought was a big improvement over the first film because it had a more compelling story that's more interesting, that I'm connecting with more, and so it doesn't feel as much at arm's length away as it does in the original movie. A mystery that you want to learn the answer to, new characters. They're interesting. I like the way Blade Runner 2049 brings back Decker. The visual look is once again great. There are interesting ideas in the movie. It's still definitely an adult, mature sci fi film that's not intended for kids, but I actually enjoy it more than I enjoy the first film. In the case of Sister Act, I like that first movie a lot. It's just a really fun, entertaining movie. I think The premise here is pretty creative, where you have this lady, Dolores Van Cartier, who, as we see right at the beginning, went to Catholic school, but she wasn't really taking it very seriously, so the nun in charge was pretty annoyed by her. Then Dolores grew up to be a lounge singer who's actually dating this guy Vince, who's actually a crime boss, and then Dolores sees this guy get killed, and thus she runs away from the night lounge and Vince, and thus she's picked up by the police. They're trying to have Vince arrested, so they want Dolores to testify against him. They say that if you do this for us, we'll hide you in a place that Vince would never suspect that you'd go to. So Dolores actually is hiding out in this convent with other nuns. She's posing as Sister Mary Clarence. She actually ends up helping out the choir, and thus the choir becomes much better than it was before. I mean, when you first hear the choir, like, oh, yikes, they are bad. But then Dolores helps them out, and thus they actually become much more popular, and this actually really revitalizes the church, brings new people in from outside, and thus people are actually paying attention, whereas they were not before. Then at the end of the movie, Vince actually finds out where Dolores is. He's taken down. When it comes to the first Sister Act and first Blade Runner, as much as Blade Runner obviously has more craft on display, at the end of the day, I'm just more likely to rewatch Sister Act than I am to rewatch Blade Runner. And so I would say I actually prefer the first Sister Act to the first Blade Runner, which is still a good movie. But here's the thing, I thought Blade Runner 2049 was great. I don't think Sister Act 2 is great. If you ask me what are the problems of the movie, I can't really think off the top of my head of specific problems, but I'm just not as drawn to it. I've rewatched the first Sister Act a lot more than I've rewatched the second one. So even though I would absolutely rewatch the first Sister Act before I rewatch the original Blade Runner, I think the Blade Runner franchise is better. That'll be it for now.